In the remote regions of Oregon's high desert, where dry winds cut across endless stretches of sagebrush and crumbling basalt hills, something remarkable began to surface, and not in a place where anyone was looking. What started as minor sediment shifts after seasonal floods became the foundation of one of the strangest geological mysteries to ever grip small-town prospectors and seasoned mineral hunters alike. The old riverbeds, long thought to be barren after a century of panning and scraping, were suddenly yielding raw diamonds, large, rough, and unlike anything seen in the region before. Began with a farmer named Eli Maddox, a fourth generation cattle rancher whose property skirted the edge of an ancient stream, now dry for most of the year. While inspecting an eroded ditch where runoff had exposed a fresh layer of sediment, Eli noticed a glint in the morning sun. At first, he assumed it was quartz. The area was littered with it, but the sharp, clean geometry of the stone caught his eye. He pocketed it and later handed it to a visiting geologist from the state university, who happened to be in town conducting a soil survey. The man froze as soon as he saw it. What Eli had handed him wasn't quartz at all. It was an uncut octahedral diamond, roughly 4.3 carats, with no trace of industrial processing. Word spread quickly through Crook County and neighboring regions. Eli's discovery was dismissed by many as a fluke, possibly the result of someone planting a stone or a misidentified mineral. But then another stone turned up, this time in the neighboring property, where a retired schoolteacher named Miriam Forbes had been growing lavender for the past 15 years. Her grandson, helping dig a drainage trench, struck a cluster of compacted gravel that held not one, but 5 stones resembling Eli's, all buried just below the surface. One of them was confirmed to be nearly 6 carats, and the others weren't. Far behind, that confirmation set off what can only be described as a silent rush. It wasn't televised. It wasn't documented in glossy magazine spreads. But trucks began appearing in places they hadn't been before. Quiet prospectors, many, with out-of-state plates, showed up with portable screens, sifters, and digital microscopes. Old ranchers who had long given up on the idea of their land holding any value beyond hay or cattle were suddenly dusting off maps from their grandparents' time. Every crack in the dried riverbeds was now a potential jackpot. And what baffled the experts was not just the presence of the diamonds, but the volume. Within 3 months, more than 200 uncut diamonds had been reported in a 20-mile stretch between Paulina and Post. No official company was mining the area, and no formal excavation permits had been issued. It was individuals, weekend diggers, and families working quietly, keeping their findings off the radar. Local hardware stores ran out of gold pans and sifting trays. One ranch supply outlet started stocking diamond testers, something that had never once appeared on its shelves in over 60 years. Geologists couldn't explain it. Oregon wasn't on any known diamond-bearing kimberlite map. The closest deposits were thousands of miles away, and yet the stones kept coming. They weren't all massive, but many were above 3 carats, uncut, pale yellow to clear, and virtually flawless in structure. The theory started circulating that the diamonds weren't native, but had been deposited long ago by glacial movement or an ancient, now buried pipe that had never been mapped. But even then, the quantity made no sense. Locals started referring to the phenomenon simply as the beds. As in, he found another one out by the beds, or she's been working the beds for weeks. The term quickly became part of regional vocabulary, and with it came a kind of reverence. People didn't talk about what they found, not publicly. The state didn't intervene, at least not right away, and that allowed the secrecy to deepen. Some, it became a second income. For others, an obsession. One man, a former mechanic named Joel Kerr, reportedly sold enough stones over a 6-month period to pay off his mortgage and purchase a second plot of land adjacent to his original 5 acres. He said nothing publicly, but his old pickup truck was replaced by a brand new F250, and his once abandoned barn was now lit up at night with industrial lights. He wasn't alone. Several small homes near the riverbeds began seeing upgrades: metal detectors on the porches, security cameras where there had never been any before. Something was happening quietly in the hills of Oregon, and almost nobody outside the region had any clue. But the story didn't end with just surface-level discoveries. As people started digging deeper, new layers of compacted material appeared, layers untouched by modern tools or farming. In these layers, prospectors found not just diamonds, but pockets of strange mineral clusters, some encased in petrified organic material, possibly ancient tree roots. It led to a new theory, that these diamonds weren't carried here at all. They had formed in place, beneath what had once been a riverbed before tectonic shifts rerouted the land. That idea defied most accepted geological models. But then again, everything about the beds defied conventional wisdom. The age, the volume, the lack of industrial activity in the area. It was as though an invisible boundary had kept these stones hidden for centuries. And now something had shifted. And no matter how many experts tried to offer explanations, the locals knew one thing: the riverbed wasn't done yet. By the early spring, the situation had evolved from curiosity to quiet obsession. What had started as a handful of locals combing through dusty riverbeds turned into a full-blown subculture. Craigslist listings offered discreet diamond evaluation, and rumors floated of backroom dealers making untraceable cash offers to anyone who could produce clean stones. While state agencies remained curiously silent, local whispers hinted that university researchers had returned for more than just soil surveys. They brought with them seismic equipment, ground-penetrating radar, and magnetometers, but never gave clear explanations to residents who asked questions. Still, people kept digging. A group of hobbyist geologists, calling themselves the Corpsmen, began collecting samples along a 5-mile radius from the first confirmed finds. They shared almost nothing publicly, except for one cryptic blog post that appeared on a fringe mineralogy forum. We've confirmed at least 14 separate points of diamond concentration, all within flood-damaged sediment layers, all within the same post-volcanic compression zones. This isn't glacial. This is something else. The post was quickly deleted, and the user behind it vanished from the forum. But that wasn't enough to stop the speculation. Residents began finding unusual markers on their land, not stones, but what looked like scratched survey symbols etched into bark or fence posts. One woman near Bear Creek discovered a small black drone hovering near her property line 3 nights in a row. Another rancher claimed someone had entered his shed and taken core samples from a pile of exposed earth without his permission. Paranoia seeped in. Locks were changed. Trail cams were installed. And all the while, the beds kept producing. The most unnerving part for many wasn't even the diamonds themselves. It was how effortlessly they appeared. Dig 6 inches in the right spot, and you could pull up a cluster. Sift through runoff after a rainstorm and find one nestled between pebbles. There were no deep mines, no industrial gear, just buckets, patience, and blind luck. Some locals began to whisper that the land itself was leaking, as though whatever had been holding the diamonds in place was now releasing them slowly, unpredictably. Others turned to folklore. A few old-timers recalled stories from their grandparents about the land having been sacred, not in the religious sense, but in the way native tribes once considered certain rivers alive. Then came the case of Nolan Graves, a 27-year-old contractor from Bend. Nolan had been visiting his cousin near the Ashwood drainage when he stumbled upon a rust-colored stone that looked too sharp too geometric to be natural. But what caught his attention wasn't the stone. It was the object embedded next to it. Half buried in the clay was a triangular shard of metal, darkened by age, but unmistakably worked by human hands. Nolan took it home, cleaned it, and realized it was not just any metal. It looked like forged carbon steel, something that didn't belong in that sediment layer at all. He posted a photo on a prospecting group, asking if anyone had seen anything similar. The response was immediate and polarizing. Some claimed it was proof of ancient mining activity. Others dismissed it as debris. But a few users privately messaged Nolan, urging him to keep it off the public forums. One warned him, bluntly, "If that's what I think it is, you're not supposed to have it. Don't post again." Nolan deleted the photo the same day. The strange object faded into rumor, but not before it sparked a new wave of speculation. What if these diamonds weren't just geological oddities? What if something had happened in that region? Something covered up, forgotten, or deliberately buried? Theories multiplied. An undocumented kimberlite eruption. A long-lost mining colony. Even talk of military testing during the Cold War that had accidentally exposed mineral seams. All of them were missing evidence. All of them ignored one thing. The diamonds were still appearing. Some prospectors began working at night, afraid of being watched. Headlamps replaced shovels during the day. One family from California built a camouflage tent rig where they stayed for 10 days, shifting gravel through custom-built sluices in complete silence. They left without a word, but weeks later a local pawn shop reported an anonymous sale of a cluster of 15 rough diamonds, all in one transaction. And yet, no major media outlet picked up the story. No headlines, no breaking news. Just small-town Facebook posts and whisper networks. It was as if the entire phenomenon existed in a parallel reality, real for those living it, invisible to everyone else. Even nearby towns had no idea what was unfolding less than 50 miles away. That suited most of the locals just fine. The fewer outsiders, the better. But underneath the excitement was a growing sense of unease. The diamonds were coming too fast, too clean, too perfectly preserved. And every week, they were being found further away from the original site, as if the riverbed wasn't just one ancient stream, but the exposed edge of something far larger, something that hadn't finished surfacing. The third season of digging brought with it not just new discoveries, but an undeniable shift in the mood across the region. What had started as a shared curiosity among neighbors and hobbyists began turning competitive and, in some cases, hostile. Land disputes erupted over inches of creekbed. Properties that had sat vacant for decades were suddenly being fenced off overnight, their boundaries reinforced with posted signs, motion lights, and even quiet guard rotations. People who once shared tips at the local diner now averted their eyes. It wasn't just about the diamonds anymore. It was about control. A man named Dean Halbrook, a Vietnam veteran who had lived peacefully on a stretch of land bordering the Ochoco National Forest for over 30 years, reportedly chased 2 men off his property at gunpoint after finding them, knee-deep in his lower pasture with metal detectors and excavation tools. Dean later admitted to neighbors that he found a handful of small stones near that same area earlier in the season, but had chosen to keep quiet. His warning to others was blunt. If they're not asking permission, they're stealing. That sentiment spread fast. What had once been open curiosity was now a silent territorial war. Then came the incident with the survey drone. For weeks, small commercial drones had been spotted hovering just above treetop level, sometimes remaining in place for hours before drifting silently away. Many assumed they were hobbyists. But one morning, a group of local prospectors recovered a downed drone that had snagged in the branch of a cedar tree. When they accessed the onboard SD card, they discovered hundreds of high-resolution images, not of scenery or wildlife, but of exact GPS-mapped soil disruptions, annotated sediment, scans, and thermal overlays of topographical features. None of it was amateur work. The SD card was quietly handed over to a retired professor of geology who lived near Prinville. He confirmed the images were from a multispectral drone, typically used by industrial survey companies or military contractors. The equipment alone cost tens of thousands of dollars. But what shocked him most was that the drone's telemetry logs had originated not from Oregon, but from an out-of-state server, and that its return signal had been directed to a masked IP address. Someone was watching the beds, and whoever they were had the resources to stay invisible. That revelation ignited a new layer of fear. What if the diamonds weren't just valuable, but part of something larger, something institutional? Several prospectors began going offline, taking extreme measures to avoid digital tracking. Phones were left behind. Vehicles were parked miles away from dig sites. Some even began using signal blockers and wearing camo to avoid being seen by drones. It was no longer about luck or geology. It had become a game of secrecy and survival. Amid all this, a surprising discovery emerged from a dig site near a dried bend once believed to be barren. A group of prospectors from Idaho, known only by first names in a closed online forum, reportedly uncovered a pocket of raw stones embedded in hardened clay, unlike anything found so far. But what made their discovery unique wasn't the size of the stones. It was what surrounded them. Fragments of what appeared to be carved bone or ivory, shaped into smooth, repeating patterns. Photos were briefly uploaded to the group before being deleted within the hour. One image showed a series of triangular grooves etched into the material, arranged in what appeared to be a symbolic sequence. A linguist who stumbled across the photo described it as non-random and possibly pre-contact. The implication was staggering. If authentic, the fragments suggested that someone, or something, had worked that land with purpose long before the diamonds were ever found. It hinted at human presence that predated written records in the region. Once again, there was no official comment, no press coverage, no investigation. The account that posted the image disappeared, but the effect lingered. Some began to theorize that the diamonds weren't natural at all, or at least not formed under typical geological timelines. Perhaps the beds were part of an ancient deposit intentionally buried, hidden, or forgotten. Maybe the diamonds had cultural or ceremonial significance to people long erased from maps and textbooks. Others rejected those ideas, insisting the finds were simply a product of a rare convergence, ancient volcanic activity combined with glacial shifts, erosion, and time. But even the most rational explanations couldn't account for the growing scale of the phenomenon. Over 500 verified stones had been found within a year, spanning more than 40 square miles. Not a single known kimberlite pipe had been located. No mining companies had claimed rights. And yet, the diamonds kept coming. A quiet export market began to form. Middlemen from out of state, and in some cases, out of the country, began contacting locals through encrypted apps. They offered to buy stones in bulk, with no documentation and no questions asked. Prices were generous, often triple what jewelers in Portland or Seattle would offer. Stones were packed into innocuous containers, jars of jam, toolboxes, even wrapped inside spare tires, and shipped across state lines by untraceable couriers. Nobody used banks. Nobody filed taxes. Despite the growing black market, few arrests were ever reported. It was as if law enforcement had been told to stay clear or didn't fully grasp what was happening. One sheriff's deputy was overheard saying, "There's nothing illegal about picking up rocks on your own land." But even that rang hollow to those who had been threatened, watched, or had gear go missing. Something larger was brewing. The diamonds were not just disrupting geology. They were reshaping the social and economic balance of the region. And still, the question remained, why now? Why this specific moment, after so many decades of silence? The land had always been there. The riverbeds had long been dry. But something had changed, something beneath the surface, something invisible. And no matter how many stones were pulled from the earth, it felt as if they were only scratching at the edge of it deeper. Truth. As the second year unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the phenomenon was not going away, and neither were the questions. The diamonds, which had once sparked excitement, now carried a weight of tension and paranoia across the entire region. What had begun with backyard discoveries and casual digs had grown into a secretive, high-stakes world where trust was rare, and silence was currency. Neighbors no longer waved across fence lines. Conversations ended when unfamiliar cars passed on dusty roads. The beds had become more than a source of wealth. They had become a border between those who knew and those who wanted in. In late summer, a private landowner named Connie Beck, who had once dismissed the rumors as small-town fantasy, reluctantly admitted she had found over a dozen stones on her property in the span of 2 weeks. Connie was known for being reclusive, and her land, a sloping patch of scrubland east of Prineville, had been in her family since the late 1800s. But when a trench dug to repair a leaking waterline exposed a glittering cluster embedded in packed gravel, she called her nephew, a retired mineralogist, before she even informed her neighbors. He arrived within hours and brought with him a ground-scanning rig, the kind used in deep-core archaeological surveys. What they found stunned them both: a buried channel extending nearly 30 feet below surface level, densely packed with what appeared to be fractured volcanic glass, iron concretions, and, scattered throughout, dozens of uncut diamonds, ranging from 1 to nearly 9 carats. Connie immediately fenced off the area. She told no one. But her nephew, perhaps unwisely, tried to make contact with a contact at a West Coast Geological Institute, hoping to verify the discovery. Within a week, men in unmarked vehicles showed up at Connie's gate. They didn't identify themselves, but they asked to see the trench. She refused. They left, but returned the next day. This time, they parked further away and waited in silence. Eventually, they disappeared. But from that day on, Connie never walked her land without a sidearm. Elsewhere, similar stories began to emerge. Prospectors digging deeper found not only diamonds, but unexplained pockets of metal fragments, charred mineral deposits, and, in one case, a perfectly circular hole in a basalt ridge, as if something had once been drilled deep into the earth. A few started whispering about tunnels, cavities, air pockets that felt engineered rather than natural. One digger described hearing a faint hum beneath the rocks. Another, after spending 4 straight nights on his site, claimed he saw ground that moved like it was breathing under the moonlight. These reports sounded insane to outsiders. Even many locals laughed them off. But for those who had seen the stones, held them in their hands, and felt the shift in the land's energy, they knew something about Oregon's old riverbeds didn't fit into any known category. The diamonds were real. That was indisputable. The land was changing. That was undeniable. But the truth about where they came from and why they were appearing now remained just out of reach. Despite the silence from official agencies, private interest exploded. By autumn, 4 separate environmental research teams arrived in the area, each claiming to be conducting unrelated geological surveys. They were tight-lipped, well-funded, and equipped with vehicles and technology far beyond what local contractors could afford. They never stayed in town long and rarely bought supplies from local stores. Residents suspected they brought everything with them, including instructions not to talk to anyone. The local university, once excited by the early findings, had also gone quiet. Their original press releases were scrubbed from their website. The geology professor who first analyzed Eli Maddox's diamond stopped returning calls and left his faculty position suddenly. When contacted by a former student, he replied only with a single sentence: "You're better off forgetting it." Back in the beds, the ground kept giving. A final reported haul came from a narrow ravine northeast of Mitchell, where an amateur team of 3 discovered a concentration of over 40 stones. Within a 2-day span, the largest single-week find ever logged in the region. They disappeared immediately after, refusing interviews, deleting social media, and reportedly moving to another state. Their former neighbors said only that they left at night and never returned. To this day, there is no official acknowledgement of the Oregon diamond phenomenon. No scientific paper, no news article in a major publication. The region remains quiet on the surface, the towns looking no different than they did a decade ago. But under the skin of the land, a silent truth pulses, deeper than the stones, older than the riverbeds, and stronger than the silence wrapped around it. For those who found the diamonds, it was life-changing. For those still searching, it's an obsession. And for everyone else, the story never existed. But ask anyone who lived near those old riverbeds. They'll tell you in a whisper, something woke up under Oregon's earth. And it hasn't finished rising.